Hey guys, what's going on? Tom Dunn here with Vicky Joy, and well, h- what we usually do is we get a little bit of strategy going and a game plan going behind the scenes, but we wasted all that time tonight hearing about
Stop.
hearing about trout, like
Oh gosh.
the um, the endangered species fish.
Yeah. So, you know, I've been telling people for years that I have this big, like, hyper spiritualized theory about that, like, God sovereignly allowed me to be bullied all through junior high and high school so I'd be strong enough for like spiritual warfare. And no, it's he toughened me up to co-host a show with Tom. Because he's mean.
Hey,
Not really. Not really. It's all good.
you haven't seen anything yet.
Oh, uh-oh.
Folks, yes, it's true. You are watching Through the Black. If you could just do me a solid, do me a kindness and hit that like button. And if you haven't done so yet, give us a subscribe. We appreciate that. Share the video with all of your friends and family, especially your family that thinks you're crazy. If you want people to know you're crazy, go ahead and share this show. We'll help you. We'll take you all the way through the black. And I don't know if you guys heard the big announcement. There has been a big announcement. March 31st and April 1st. We are. I bet everybody thought I was going to say something else. We're gonna do a conference, and it's going to be in Brookville, Ohio, Dayton, Ohio. The tickets go on sale next Monday. And yes, we are working hard behind the scenes to get the website ready for the people to buy the tickets. So, one of those things we're doing is we're going to correct the date on the conference. Yes, one of these days. And as she's posting that, I'm saying it, by the way. So, hey, by the way, Katie, could you bring up the Through the Black website? We haven't been over there in a while, and I want to show some people some stuff. There you go. If you notice, there's a few changes on there. We changed the picture up at the top. Well, that's the big change, and we took away our icons, but then we have some regular buttons there, and I'm gonna have to blow this up so I can see it, but so I can remember what's here. So, of course, our homepage, our resources, the about page. Click on the Russ page, and you can. It'll take you to the courses by Russ Dizdar. Okay, these are the courses, and the main ones that we recommend here: confronting the powers, freedom encounters, theocentric counseling. There's prayer mapping. The Book of Daniel. Man, I love that course, guys. And you guys can click on those, and it takes you to sub pages. And you can download the notes, listen to it, everything right there. Katie made it easy for you. So, Katie, if you go back to the main page, go back to the home page, and then if you haven't been here in a while, of course, there's going to be a link going to the conference coming up. Okay, and you're going to be able to go there. You're going to be able to buy tickets. If you scroll down, you'll be able to see the shows. Okay, this is where we are right now. This is like that moment in Spaceballs, or so everybody's singing that movie. Like we're looking at the screen, but we're actually on the screen. Yeah, don't whatever you do, don't click that. It could cause I don't know. But anyway, and then if you go down a little bit further, it'll show this week's shows, and of course, this is where we're at right now, and last week's shows as well. So there you go. And don't forget that show on Tuesday last week. You're going to have to go to Rumble to watch that because we got shut down. We kind of knew we would off of YouTube. Wow, there's so much to talk about there. There's so many developments since then. And folks, yeah, I long for the day when I can have freedom in America and be able to talk about whatever I want, wherever I want, and not be censored because we're trying to get the truth out. And certain places, of course, not YouTube, but certain places, we love YouTube, our masters there, right, are trying to censor us. So anyway, yeah, I just want to show you guys that. Of course, could you go Katie, to the store real quick. So the Through the Black store, there's a link up at the top, and we don't do this. Okay, of course, there is our I Will Fight for You shirt. It is well t-shirt. It is well with my soul. The Gates of Hell. And then there is our zip up hoodies and our pullover hoodies. All of this stuff is available. The resist hoodies. Some of this stuff is limited quantities and sizes. I don't know which is which, but yeah, like those shirts are only available in certain sizes until we one day reorder. But we're coming up on close to, I don't know, 150 shirts sold, and that's all the rest of our stuff. Of course, a couple movies down at the bottom, and those movies, we've changed it. You used to have to buy those separate, but now you get the bonus footage, which is hours of extra stuff on both of those DVDs. So, and the one for This Is a War has 2 DVDs with it of extra hours and hours of extra stuff. So, but most people know about our movies and have our movies. So, but I even forget what's in the movies because it's been so long since I've seen them. Anyway, that's what's going on. Guys, don't forget that both Colleen and Vicky Joy have written books. They only come out at night, and The Lie Effect. So lamarzulli.net, and I believe you can get Colleen's off of Amazon. But hey, all that house cleaning, there's a lot of stuff to talk about. Sorry for that. We don't do that every day, but we just want to mention it because people don't know. And some people will be on here and they'll be like, man, I've been watching for months. I didn't know you made a movie. I didn't know Vicky wrote a book. I'm like, okay, where in the world have you been? But honestly, the right way to do it is like talk about it like every 30 minutes. Like that's the way radios advertise and do it. And we're not really good at that. We're not really great self-promoters. I want to, the only reason I want people to know about this stuff is for their benefit, is for their edification. So I'm not a really great salesman. But anyway, that is that. Vicky, are you ready to jump into this topic?
Ooh, I think so. Man. Let's just put a warning out there, everybody. We're just going to be mature adults here tonight, and we're going to have a nice little conversation.
Yeah, everybody's friends.
We're all going to get along, and we're all going to like each other by the end of this.
Yeah, hey, this is going to be greeting time. Reach out and shake the hand of the person in the pew in front of you, will you?
Yeah, right.
Oh my gosh. Like, Vic, I go through different stages in my life. Like, I think I definitely had some extrovert stages in my life. And for some reason now, I have evolved into an introvert. And I'm very uncomfortable during greeting time.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, I know. I hear you. I hear you, man.
Yeah. It's really awkward for me. And which makes it awkward for the people that I'm trying to greet. Like, I don't know. And then there's just a bunch of stuff in it anyway.
No, I know, man. You should see that greeting time in Minnesota, where we're all like Scandinavians, and they'll be like, turn to the person next to you and say good morning, and everyone's like, good morning. And everyone's like, we're done. And I lived in California for a year, and their little greet thing was like 20 minutes, and you had to like walk around, and like it wasn't done until you had hugged and like everyone in the whole church. And I was always like trying to find the bathroom, like, get me out of here.
Oh my gosh. Well, at my church, I drop my wife and kids off, and I hope I miss, like, I'll park the car. Like, I cut it so close, and I'm like, man, what else can I do on the way to the service, like, to miss greeting time?
Yeah.
And only once in a while do I miss it. And then sometimes I walk in right when they're like, all right, everybody, greet the person. And I'm just like, why? And they started this stuff right in the middle of the pandemic.
Oh, wow.
Which I don't have a problem with shaking people's hands, but everybody else, they were like, the world was telling people, hey, be careful, you're spreading germs.
Right.
And then they started this thing, and it is whatever. So, okay, we went down a weird rabbit hole before we even got started.
Trout.
So, Vic, you and I came up with this idea last week. So I was actually out with my friend Rob, and him and I hang out on Wednesday nights, and we do prayer time and fellowship time, and stuff like that.
Cool.
And somehow we got on this subject, and I brought it up to you. And the way that I thought about this, that kind of happened, was I thought about this song called "The Pill" by Loretta Lynn.
Yes.
And there's something that I did that I didn't mean to do, which is I meant to send this to Katie and ask her to look up those lyrics, or to send her a link, and I didn't do that. But anyway, if as I'm buying time, if Katie can look that up, and then also there's another song. It's an interesting song. We should go to this one first. It's called, okay, yeah, here we go. Let's just go ahead and do this first. This is "The Pill," okay, by Loretta Lynn. Now, she didn't write this song, but okay, so this got me thinking, okay? I want to read some of these lyrics to you, okay? It says, "You wined and dined me when I was your girl, promised if I'd be your wife, you'd show me the world. But all I've seen of this old world is a bed and a doctor bill. I'm tearing down your brooder house because now I've got the pill. All these years I've stayed at home while you had all your fun. And every year that's gone by, another baby's come. There's going to be some changes made right here on Nursery Hill. You've set this chicken your last time because now I've got the pill." And this is your typical country song from the 70s, okay? Now, Katie, could you look up the song "One's on the Way" by Loretta Lynn? Now, look at this contrast, okay, Vic? And I came across this, I think maybe a couple years ago. I'm a big fan of Loretta Lynn, and I actually had tickets to see her 2 times over the last 20 years, and she got sick both times. So listen to this song, okay? And folks, I promise this is all going to make sense in a while. Okay, so listen to this. This is a song called "One's on the Way" by Loretta Lynn. They say you have, they say to have her hair done. Liz flies all the way to France, and Jackie's seen at the discotheque doing a brand new dance. And the White House social season should be glittering and gay, but here in Topeka, the rain is a falling, the faucet is a dripping, and the kids are a balling. One of them a toddling, and one is crawling, and one's on the way. So I want to don't take this down yet, Katie. So the idea behind this song is this woman is always pregnant, okay? Which I don't know how many kids Loretta Lynn had, maybe 6 or 8. So she actually had 4 kids before she was 19 years old, okay? She was married very, very young. I don't know if anybody's seen the movie Coal Miner's Daughter, but that movie really kind of showed her. She got married, I want to say she was 14 or 15 years old. Okay.
Whoa. Whoa.
And from Butcher Holler, Kentucky. Okay. In Van Lear, the county of Van Lear. I don't know what that static is. Might be on your end, Vic.
Oh, yeah, it's me here.
Okay. So anyway, Butcher Holler, Kentucky, way back in the holler, right? So the coal miner's daughter, her dad was literally a coal miner. And this guy by the name of Dew came along, okay, played by Tommy Lee Jones in the movie. But when she was so young, when she got married, she didn't even understand what sex was. And she learned about sex actually after she got married. And it was a shock to her, okay? She didn't know that this was, part of her wifely, role. Anyway, she had 4 kids by the time she was 19. And I want to read some more of this song. It says, I'm glad that Raquel Welch just signed $1 million pact, and Debbie's out in Vegas working up a brand new act. While the TV show Newlyweds, a real fun game to play. But here in Topeka, the screen doors is banging, the coffee's boiling over, and the wash needs a hanging. One wants a cookie, and one wants a changing, and one's on the way. So go down a little bit more. And I want to show you Okay, listen to verse 3. I'm skipping to verse 3. It says, the girls in New York City, they all march for women's lib, and Better Homes and Gardens shows a modern way to live. And the pill may change the world tomorrow, but meanwhile today, here in Topeka, the flies are a buzzing, the dog is a barking, and the floor needs a scrubbing, and one needs a spanking, and one needs a hugging. Lord, one's on the way. So anyway, these songs, and that's good, Katie, are a good reflection of the feelings of women back, in those days. I found out that Loretta Lynn, I forget the number. She might have had, I don't know if this number's right, like 14 banned songs, okay, that they thought were too controversial. And this was like, The Pill was like the number one song. They're like, country music radio stations weren't going to play it. So, Vic, I can identify with these lyrics. Now, my grandmother, I kind of grew up with my grandparents, okay? My grandparents were literally from the hills of Kentucky. Okay. My grandmother lost both of her parents before she was 12 years old. Okay. She was kind of raised by her siblings. Her and my grandfather got married very young, not as young as Loretta Lynn, but I want to say maybe she was 16. And he might have been 18 or 19. So very, very young. It's really a sad situation. And we talked about this a little bit, kind of this culture from, you know, I don't know the time period, okay, but let's just say 50 years ago, 100 years ago, this culture of male dominance, this culture of barefoot and pregnant was the status for women, and that's what was expected of them. It was a culture of abuse towards women, okay? And what else am I missing here? Something else I was going to say. As media begins to get more and more popular through newspapers and magazines, women, in different parts of the country are seeing what they think is freedom. Okay. And you see that described in that song, One's on the Way. I'm talking a lot and I want to give you a chance to jump in here, but I'm just trying to set the scene for what we're going to talk about. There's a reason why we got to where we're at today. And there's several different reasons. Okay. But this is one of them. So I want to give you a chance to jump in there.
Yeah, so sorry guys, my furnace is recirculating, and when the fan's on, my Yeti picks it up and it's really loud. So it's gonna come and go like that. Sorry, but
no problem. We can hear you good.
Yeah. So Tom, there's so many tentacles to this argument because at the same time, this is the downside to living in a fallen world. However God initially intended it, it's been destroyed. And the perfect plan that he had set up in the garden between Adam and Eve with marriage, the ideal is gone, because you are dealing with a lot of people we're fallen now and we're selfish. And then there's situations where people grow up, they don't have a father, they don't have a husband, or they don't have a good one. And but at the same time, I feel like then marriage itself becomes this thing like where if a woman does want to get married and have kids, she's somehow then shamed now. And that's all you want to do. And, I graduated from high school in 1990. So we're not talking, the 50s or the 60s here. In 1990, all my friends, when we talked about graduating from high school, even in 1990, we were all talking about wanting to get married and having a family and having kids and being a mom. And I mean, all my friends ever talked about was wanting to be a mom. And I don't think hardly any of my friends even went to college. And a lot of my friends were getting married out of high school. And so this whole idea that I think sometimes the media plays this so much that we get the impression that there isn't a woman out there that wants to be married or loves being married. And I think we lose that. I mean, I think there's a lot of women out there who are married and barefoot and pregnant, and they're super happy that they don't have to put on high heels and pantyhose and sit in rush hour and go out to work every day. So I think that sometimes that it's skewed. There are actually women out there who are married and extremely fulfilled and happy and kind of really like the guy they live with.
Yeah. Well, in God's design, it's a great life, right? But
Right.
if there's abuse, okay, and I would say, somebody like Loretta Lynn, she definitely suffered abuse. She was married to an alcoholic husband, and not this show's not about Loretta Lynn, okay? But anyway, she's a good illustration, okay? Because it's something I can identify with. She came from Kentucky, really not far from where my grandparents came from.
Wow.
Probably less than 90 miles. Probably an hour away from where my grandparents were from. And anyway, she's a good illustration. So she was definitely, it talks about abuse. And somebody, in the song, I forget which one it was. Maybe it was The Pill, where she's saying, you're out running all night long, and I'm home with the baby. That's not the way that it's supposed to be. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And
Right.
that's not a healthy marriage. It's not a healthy relationship. That's abuse. That's neglect. So I get women wanting to reject that. Okay. There was basically an opportunity for men to exploit biblical, you know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah.
They would take advantage of women and use the Bible to do it, which is wrong. Okay.
Yes.
So we've seen that, and I've seen some stuff growing up with my grandparents. And I've said this before, I loved my grandfather. He was a godly man, but he learned things from his father. What he learned was not good. Okay. He didn't learn a lot, but what he learned was just not good. And there was a mindset that those men were in back then, and it was not good. I think maybe the end, I don't know if I want to say the end of it, but maybe this was, if you think of the show All in the Family with Archie Bunker, he was constantly saying to his wife, Edith, stifle. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
You remember, you know what I mean?
Yes. Oh gosh. Yeah, you couldn't get away with that on TV anymore.
No, I know. Isn't that crazy?
Oh my gosh.
The Jeffersons are All in the Family. Sanford and Son, shows that I loved. There's no way that those shows would fly today.
No way. No way. That is so crazy. Yeah, and it's tough too, Tom. And I want to just touch on basically on what you said, briefly on what you just said about how even amongst Christians there can be an abuse of how they even enforce the biblical ideal in the home. And so, if you're kind of reminding your wife every single time she has her, not only a disagreement, but maybe her own opinion, if you are constantly bringing the Ephesians verses up over and over and over again, you're my wife, you have to submit. So I'm an English major, so I always think of things in terms of like, what words mean. And so what I used to tell certain family members who that was like their favorite verse, it's like when a woman is fearfully obeying someone because they're going to get in trouble if they don't, that's no longer submission.
Right.
Submission is this willing act of loving, sacrificial, like it's something you're ultimately doing for the Lord. You're submitting willfully as an act of worship to the Lord, and within the context of that covenant. But if you've got a husband, even a Christian husband, who's demanding submission, it ceases to be submission, because now she doesn't have that choice. She's not doing it out of obedience to God. She's doing it because she's afraid of what will happen if she doesn't. Now it's just obedience. And so I would say that, if you're the kind of guy that's like, hey, whatever, get the job done, I don't care what you call it, she's my wife, she's got to do what I say, there's something off there. And I think that, we have to, as women, we have to take it out of the context of I'm being forced by a tyrannical male figure in my home to do whatever I'm being told to. This is a spiritual act of worship. I covenanted before the Lord to submit. So I just wanted to touch on it briefly, Tom, because I know the S word is like, oh, you can't talk about submission anymore. That's outdated and that's evil and that's tyrannical. But submission done properly can be very beautiful and I think is more beneficial to a husband. I think if you have a wife who is willingly submitting to you, you're going to be a lot happier than constantly demanding it from her.
You know, and I don't think the church knows how to teach this subject. And that's a problem. I think they kind of put their foot in their mouth every time they try to do it. And there's very few really good teachings out there. Some people will point to like some of the stuff that Doug Wilson's doing, but I really am not a fan personally. I like Doug Wilson on some stuff, but I personally don't trust him to tell me how to run my family. It's that, you know, what he's talking about, and I'm not going to unpack all that tonight, but everybody's got to be on board for that. Okay. And not everybody, you know, not everybody is. So you're the husband and the wife have got to, you know, be in agreement, and it can be a beautiful thing. I think it's uh basically marriage is lifting each other up. You know what I'm saying? As a husband, I'm trying to think of ways, you know, that I can lift my wife up, that I can, you know, just encourage her. But what I've seen as examples, not only in my own family, but in when I was growing up in the church, you know, that I grew up in sometimes was oppression, holding them down, insults. It was, you know, jokes. It was jokes about women. You know what I'm saying? And things just no respect, no respect for women. And I I don't know how that affected me personally. Um, I know I didn't like the way that my grandmother was treated. Okay. And she wasn't abused, she wasn't beat or anything, but she was looked at like a lesser human being. Okay. Um, and I was pretty close with her, and I think that's what really you know, just had an effect on me. Like, I don't want to be, you know, I don't want to treat any woman like that. You know what I mean? And it was, like I said, it wasn't any kind of abuse, but the way that it used to be is a wife was like a maid, you know, and I don't know. It doesn't, you know, it doesn't sit well with me. So
Yeah, I know. I mean, I have memories of back into like the 70s, you know, and not that when I was that young I was necessarily observing grown-ups marriages, but it very much was. It kind of, you know, in the church a lot of times it did have the feel that, you know, the woman was like kind of a level above the kids, but was still kind of part of the you know what I mean? Like
yeah.
she had some extra duties and responsibilities, but was still sort of like, I remember some family members when I was young telling me that they felt like they were just another one of the kids in the family by way of, you know, the rights and the privileges, and that's sad. And I don't know, Tom, you know, all of this is in theory for me because I'm not married and I've never been married, and obviously I have this overlay in my brain of the perfect ideal of what God set up and what it would look like in perfection. And obviously wanting to please the Lord and wanting to be, you know, obviously if I was married, I would want to be a godly wife and I'd want to give it my all and I'd want to be pleasing to the Lord. But just knowing how I am and the way I'm wired and the way I've sort of had to kind of fight for myself my whole life. And um, I have to admit, like it scares me. Like I just fear like I just don't know how good of of a wife I would really be by way of the standard of what God would want. So it's definitely always been complicated, but it seems to me that the more we try to accommodate the women's movement, like the more, you come a long way, baby. It's almost like the more rope we give women, I don't see that marriages are getting better because of that. In fact, I'm seeing more divorces and women having more of a freedom to just bail. And so I don't think, how do we get away from this? A woman's just a maid, but do it in such a way that it's improving marriages rather than just breaking more of them up.
So going back to another TV reference, if anybody's seen the TV show The Wonder Years, okay, do you remember? I don't know if you remember this, Vic, or if you saw this show, but I remember the dinner scenes in this show where the dad would come home from work and he was just grumpy. It was like nobody talked to him, right? Like he just seemed like very vulnerable, and like he was gonna blow up. He was, like nitroglycerin, very unstable. And I saw somewhere a comedian talking the other day that back in the 70s, dads used to be like the the villain in a Western town that was coming back, and they would be like, Dad's coming home, like, the bad guy's coming back into town, everybody hide, So that's the way that it used to be. I don't think that was healthy, but now what we have is an extreme in the other direction,
right?
Where men are so soft, are so weak, are so it's reversed, and the submission is the other way.
Yeah,
and it's throwing the whole universe out of whack. I mean, I'm trying to illustrate this here, Vic, but help me out.
No, I know exactly what you're saying, and I'm just laughing because my dad traveled for a living when I was young, so he would be gone on the road like 2-3 weeks at a time, and me and my mom and my brother would get really comfortable with our little life at home, and there was peace and happiness, and we got along. We would laugh, and we'd rent movies, and we would eat whatever we wanted for dinner, and then Dad would come home, and he had such a stressful job. I think for quite a while there, he was paid on commission only. So if he didn't sell, there was no money. So high stress job. And it was that way, Tom. Like everyone was on eggshells when he came home, right? And so yeah, that's crazy. But now we've got the situation where if the product of that role, like if the guy who comes home, like the guy from the Western town, now we've got it double, right? Because now the mom's got a highly stressful job that she's coming home from too. So now you've got two parents that are coming home on the edge, right? So I don't know what it's like, Tom. You probably have more married friends than I do, but the few that I have, like, we all the way and through my freshman year in college, I mean, we ate dinner together. It didn't matter how busy you got or who had a job. Like we would come home, we would be at the dinner table, and there was no cell phones back then. So everybody was tuned in and talking to each other. And even that has been a massive loss for the family, that fellowship and that communication. And now even if you do all happen to coincidentally wind up at the same dinner table together, it's like if everyone's on their phone, who cares, right?
Right.
So,
I got a funny story from my my aunt and uncle, my cousin. My uncle was a traveling salesman. He did a lot of traveling and work. And when he was away, my cousin would really just take advantage of his mom, my aunt, and just try to not listen to her, not take her seriously. So when she would get him up, in the morning for school, he would be like, nah, I'm not going, like as he's getting older. And she would have to fight with him to get him gone. And she called her husband and she's like, hey, this is what's going on. I can't get him out of bed. And he's like, well, okay, let me see what I can do. And he changed some things around, and he came home at night. And then in the morning, he was like, okay, now go in and wake him up like you usually do. And so she went in and she said, hey, time for school, time to get, time to go to school. And he pulled the same stuff again. And my uncle came in like a drill sergeant, man, and just started yelling at him and like, hey, you need to get up out of bed right now. You need to listen to your mom. You need to, bam, he popped up out of that bed, man, scared him to death. And she never had a problem with him after that because he never knew when his dad was going to be home.
That's awesome. Oh,
Dude,
man.
I love
Oh,
that
man.
story because my cousin, oh, dude. Anyway, I have a cousin that we were when we were young, we were real close, and then they moved away probably when he was a few years old. But we just kind of grew up like brothers. We were real close, even though he lived in Tennessee and lived in California. So anyway, funny story. Vic, there's a lot of stuff that we could talk about with this, but I want to kind of talk about. I want to look at some other things, and I want to have Katie get that video ready. And I don't remember the title of it. I'm pretty sure it's the first video that I sent you, and there's some kind of music going on in the background. Okay.
Man,
No,
I'm
it's
sorry.
okay.
My tablet is like all these notifications were coming in. I'm sorry. It's
so-
always me. It's always me.
Well, I believe that there was an opportunity to exploit the abuse of these women, the frustration of these women, okay? And it had been going on for a long time. Now, this video is kind of long, but I tried to break it up, but I think we're just going to listen to the whole thing. It's about maybe 5 or 6 minutes long. And I don't know if you got a chance to see this one, but it's about the connection of the occult and feminism, okay?
Oh wow.
So let's go ahead and watch this. Now, this is Mitch Horowitz, and this guy's not a Christian, by the way. I'm not 100% sure that he's an occultist. He might be, okay? But he's a historian here in this video, okay? So I'm not endorsing the guy that's saying these things. Liberalism and feminism were born from the occult. So this is very interesting. He's very well, studied in a lot of this stuff, and this makes sense. So let's take a listen to this right here.
The American occult really became established in the firmament of this country probably between the 1690s and the late 1840s. And there were several very definite personalities and groups and events that made that possible. As I mentioned earlier, by the 1680s, 1690s, mystical groups began to flee Central Europe and come to America. If you flash forward to 1776, you not only have the Shakers organizing their first village outside of Albany, New York, but in the state of Rhode Island, there was a young woman named Jemima Wilkinson who had been caught up in the Baptist revival that we call the Great Awakening. And in fall of 1776, Jemima, who had grown up on a prosperous Quaker farm, took to her bed with a terrible fever, and she was slipping in and out of a coma, and her family was sure that she was going to die. And then one day, without any antecedent whatsoever, she leaped up from the bed, all red and ruddy and filled with this renewed energy, and announced to her shocked Quaker family that she would no longer be known as Jemima, that woman had died, and that the being standing before them would be known as the public universal friend. And she became, in a certain sense, the nation's first spirit channeler. By the early 1800s, that area of central New York State became known as the burned over district. It was a place that was considered burned over with the fires of religious passion. And that's where you start to see the first alternative religious culture developing in America and really in the modern world. The Iroquois Indians had occupied central New York State, but they were pushed off that land by the colonial government just after the War of Independence. So central New York was open to land settlement and speculation, and a whole wave of relatively liberal New Englanders began to flood into central New York State. And for about a generation or two, in the early to mid 1800s, the place produced most of the new religions that grew out of America. Mormonism, Seventh-day Adventism, it's where the Shakers spread. You had the first experiments, large experiments. In American utopianism, the Oneida community was located there. The place was a hotbed of political reform. The first women's rights conference was held in Seneca Falls, New York. It was also the birthplace of a movement that we call spiritualism, which involved seances and spirit raps and talking to the dead. And spiritualism just became the driving engine behind everything. Because as spiritualism grew in central New York State, and it started essentially in a little village called Hydesville outside the city of Rochester, where two teenage girls in 1848 told their Methodist household that the bangs and raps and noises that were being heard in their cabin were actually spirit raps. And the girls said, we can reach to the beyond. And people believed them. They were hungry to believe them because Americans saw themselves as a people who were entitled to a kind of new dispensation from God. They used to refer to the country sometimes as the new Israel or the American Israel. They were expressing the most radical impulses of the Reformation, in which people believed that you could reach the beyond, you could reach the divine with no intermediary. You didn't need the man in robes. You could do it yourself. And as soon as people began to organize into seance circles and people began to identify themselves as trance mediums who could reach the beyond, it opened up a door for women to assume their first roles of religious leadership in the modern world. This really can't be overstated. Women had no clerical role anywhere in the Western world, period. When spiritualism dawned, suddenly women who wanted to engage in the civic and religious and political culture were becoming trance mediums. It is no accident that in this burned over district of upstate New York, you had the birth of spiritualism coinciding with the first conference for women's voting rights. The two were branches coming out of the same tree. For about a generation in the 19th century, you could not find a voting rights activist, a suffragist activist, who hadn't spent some time at the seance table, and vice versa. The movements just absolutely grew out of one another. Once that social and spiritual opening was created for women in the form of spiritualism, suddenly ambitious women who wanted to participate in the culture had a kind of a voice. So this began a marriage between occult spirituality and reformist or radical politics that just roared through the country and really has never gone away. So the 1840s, some historians call that decade the Mad 40s. The 1840s was the pivotal moment in American life where an avant-garde spiritual culture began to grow and where a radical and reformist political culture began to grow. This was also bound up with ideologies that were coming over to America from Europe. Chief among them was the method called mesmerism, which we today call hypnotism. Americans were in love with mesmerism because it was something that you could do in your own home. You could mesmerize or hypnotize your aunt or your mother or your father, and people would go into these trance states, and you could introduce auto-suggestion to them, or as some people saw it, you could cure them of illnesses. And sometimes people would reemerge from a trance state and report that they had some kind of out-of-body experience. They had traveled to other realms or to other planets or to the heavens. Cult ideologies, all these supernatural ideologies where people said they were in touch with the world beyond. They could see either into other realms or into the future, or they could serve as a spirit channel. They were confirming a very, very deep-seated hope that Americans had about themselves, and they served as a conduit for radically liberal religious and political ideas.
Okay, so anyway, Vic, go ahead and jump in there and comment on that video.
Wow. Well, I have never heard anyone connect those two dots, but it absolutely makes sense to me. You know, bringing it kind of into modernness, and I'm not endorsing this author or book by any means, but I recently heard Jonathan Cahn giving a little spiel on his latest book, like The Return of the Gods or something like that. And he was talking about how kind of like the unholy trinity is Baal, Baal, and the Queen of Heaven, and then Molech. And he was talking about similar things about how this this deification of femaleness and everything that's going on now in our modern culture that revolves around the womb and the definition of various, our women And this whole culture that was birthed out, you can trace it all the way back to this Queen of Heaven, who has been wreaking havoc probably since the garden, because, you know, I mean, the very act of Eve taking the fruit that she was not supposed to was sort of a double act of her own will, right? That was like the first feminist move, I guess, because she disobeyed God. But technically, the person who told her that rule was initially her husband. Her husband communicated that to her. God said, don't eat of anything in the garden, eat of everything except this. So she was actually disobeying the law of God, but she was also, that was the first time she was not submitting to her husband, right? So that was like this first sort of awakening in the mind of a female where I don't have to listen to these guys. God and my husband, these two layers of protection between me and the spirit realm, I don't need those layers of protection anymore. I can take care of myself. So I think this Queen of Heaven has been active probably since the beginning of time. And she goes by many, many, many names, you know, Inanna, Aphrodite, Ishtar, Astarte, Easter. She goes by a million different names, but I definitely, you would not have to convince me long that there's a demonic entity behind all of this.
You know, it's interesting. He's talking about the geographical area, which is known as New York now, and the things that have happened up there. Of course, Russ was very aware of a spiritism community up there where you're not even allowed to live unless you're some kind of a witch, okay? Which is directly connected to a town that's not too far away from where I'm at. We actually did a documentary on a little spiritism camp. If anybody remembers, it was about it's about a year and a half ago, I think, where I went down and there's this big like white tabernacle thing that's caving in on itself, and there was a spiritism church down there. So and there were hymns, there were spiritism hymns. I actually got some of them, and it was really weird. It was really weird. I need to grab one of those hymns and bring it down and show you guys sometime. So anyway, okay, I'll jump in here and read this. Proven fact: men's brains equal many separate boxes. Women's brains, ball of yarn connections. Men have laser focus. Women see around the corner. Beautiful balance when respected as designed. Yes, yes. There's a book like that talks about men's brains are like waffles and women's brains are like spaghettis. Like everything is connected, you know. And men's brains are like, you know, the compartments, the little squares in a waffle. But very good. So anyway, back to the spiritism, back to New York. There was a lot of occultism that came out of that area. And I think one of the examples is a guy who touched our town, Johnny Appleseed, who was, very, influential in just in the history of our town. Okay, they even have there's a shopping center that I was at yesterday called, Appleseed Shopping Center. There are things named, and he's part of the history here in my town. He was part of a cult out of that area. Mormonism came out of that area. Joseph Smith. Okay. The spiritism, all of that stuff. And I like how he explains that the women began to take leadership roles in these cults. So when that happened, they began to become political leaders. Okay. What's the girl's name? I got the book. I meant to grab it before we went on air. The name of the book is called Mrs. Satan, and I think it's Victoria Wood something. Anyway, she was from about less than an hour south of here. She's got a crazy story. She was a traveling soothsayer. She was like a traveling fortune teller. She's the first Mrs. Satan. Who's it? Victoria Wood. Who is that? Victoria Woodhill Hall. Okay, yeah. So yeah, I don't have my glasses on. Anyway, it's interesting, Vic. And actually, L.A. Marzulli was supposed to fly in, but COVID shut him down, you know, all the restrictions. He was going to investigate this when he came to do a conference. And this woman, Victoria Woodhull, used to go up on top of this mound, okay? It's a burial mound, okay, a Nephilim mound. And she used to prophesy from it when she was a little girl.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, she was the first woman to ever run for president in the United States in the late 1800s. Okay, and her part of her platform was free love. She wanted to make it so if you were married, you could sleep around. Okay, that was her platform. So we think of, okay, this came out of nowhere. It didn't come out of nowhere. Okay, this has been going on a long time. But Vic, one of the reasons I want to talk about this, conversations that you and I have, it's like, what the heck happened to women where their hearts are so calloused that we have all the evidence that this is a baby, but they're like, no, I don't care. My body, my choice. My body trumps, the rights of this baby, and it's okay to rip this baby apart, to suck its brains out, to behead it, okay, to suck its intestines out.
Yeah.
How did women become so calloused? I think that this is a generational thing that's been passed down, mixed with occultism, mixed with some other stuff that we're going to take a look at in a minute. But here we are today, the fall of patriarchy. And I say that, we titled that obviously as clickbait. Obviously, we believe men need to stand up and become men, okay? And men and women need to assume their biblical roles. That's where they're going to find the most satisfaction. Anyway, Vic.
Amen. Well, and Tom, I think the fall of the patriarchy, it happened in the garden. And this is not new. Everyone in the chat's going to be like, I've heard this a million times. I'm not trying to be profound here, but we do learn from the text that when Eve offered the fruit to her husband, it says she offered it to Adam, who was with her. He was standing right there the whole time. He was observing this whole conversation. At no point did this guy speak up and say, hey, that's not what God said, or hey, let me handle this. He failed. Right. This is the first example we have in history of passivity in a husband, where, you know what, it's just easier to let her talk. I'll let her handle this. He didn't defend her. He didn't step up. He didn't take the reins. He didn't say, hey, you talk to me. So I think that, a lot of people are like, oh, when I get to heaven, I'm going to talk to Eve. And it's like, well, I think we really got to talk to Adam too. What were you thinking standing there? As soon as she grabbed that fruit, as soon as she touched it, why didn't you bang that out of her hand?
Agreed.
Why didn't you do something? You just stood there and let her self-destruct, and so
the scripture's clear.
Absolutely. So I think that's when it all started. And what we got now, to answer your question, Tom, about the whole abortion thing, to me, on this fallen planet, the most, I think, human example we have of unconditional love is a mother. Like, a mom will die for her child. She will fight for life. She'll do everything she can if she's sick to get well, and everything, like, for her kids. So when you get to a point in culture where a mother is callously allowing the destruction of her own offspring, we have come to, I think, the lowest possible rung on the ladder of humanity, and again, this has to involve the spirit of Molech. I cannot believe the footage that I see on YouTube, Tom, of women screaming and turning red and their veins sticking out, demanding that, like, the most important right is the right to end the life of their own offspring. What has bewitched us?
It's insane. But Vic, obviously we're not endorsing any of this. We're not agreeing with any of it, but we're trying to understand, how do we get here? It's like, what happened? What happened to women and what happened to men? It seems like it has somehow sped up recently, but this has been building up speed for a long time. It just it boggles my mind, and I see it over and over again. And I was down earlier this year. I was down on the State House lawn, and there were thousands of women and some men shouting and screaming, basically to fight for their right to kill the baby inside of their body. It was just crazy, just insane.
I'm trying to find the verses here, Tom, because I want to answer that question, like, how did we get here? And I know no one's going to like this, but I really just feel compelled to say it. It's just food for thought. A lot of people bring up Deborah in the Bible, and she was this prophetess, and look what she did. And they kind of use that as sort of the biblical example of, like, see, women can have these headship roles and whatever. But what people typically fail to do is start reading that story from the very beginning of the chapter. It tells us in the first few introductory verses that in that day, Israel, everyone was doing what was right in their own eyes. They had fallen into massive idolatry. They'd fallen away from the Torah. They were worshiping all of the idols around them. And so what happened in that culture? The gender roles got reversed. Law of reversal, the occult, they always do the opposite. So now all of a sudden, everyone's doing what is right in their own eyes. They're worshiping a lot of these idols. And a lot of these idols, if you study Inanna and the Queen of Heaven, if you like, Sharon Gilbert does amazing research on Inanna. Inanna was a trans goddess. The records say that she was a warrior man by night and like a woman by day. And the priests that served in her temple, the Aphrodite temples and things, they were the Pili Pilis and the Kagaras. They were basically castrated men who dressed as women. And then they were these women who dressed as men. And so this worship of the Queen of Heaven, which we know Israel fell into, because the women on the stairs when the prophet was getting the grand tour of all the abominations and the things under the temple and all that, then the angel was like, I'm going to show you something, even worse than this. And there was women weeping for Tammuz on the temple steps. And Tammuz, Queen of Heaven, same deal. And so everyone was doing what was right in their own eyes, worshiping this Queen of Heaven goddess. And everything in the culture got flipped on the head. All of a sudden, the men were passive. They didn't want to go to war. They didn't want to take care of the enemies coming in. And the women stepped up and wore the pants because they had to, because the men weren't doing it. And so I think that's a detail that's missed when we uphold Deborah as like the apologetic sort of proof that God raises up women to do things like this. I'm not saying that he doesn't use women. Don't hear me saying that. But what I am telling you is we can't neglect the fact that the introduction piece to that story is that Israel had fallen into complete corruption and idolatry and were doing whatever was right in their own eyes. And I just think that's an important detail, because in our own culture, we're seeing the same thing. We saw it in the garden. We saw it in this passage. We see it in our own culture. When we abandon the laws of God and we all do whatever we want, the gender roles are reversed. Men become passive and the women become headship and leaders. And so I know no one's going to like that, and I'll get hate mail, and I don't care. I'm prepared for the hate mail, but I just think it's important to point it out.
It's obviously a pattern that we can see in the Bible, and that it's playing out, the cycle of the generations. And we can see lots of patterns, political patterns, spiritual patterns, and, definitely what we're talking about today. So, Vic, I want to play a couple other videos here, and there's a lot to talk about. We could go on and on about this, okay? But I want to show everybody, and if you could pull up the Aaron Russo video, Katie. This is interesting because, yes, I agree with what James said. This is a judgment from God, and God used, players, okay, that were willing to do this, to bring about this judgment. This is an interesting story from Aaron Russo. Aaron Russo was a guy who made the movie From Freedom to Fascism. If you haven't seen it, it's free online somewhere. Watch it. So this is the guy. This guy, he actually passed away before I even was really awake. And I would have loved to meet this guy. You can just kind of tell that he just has like a really gentle spirit and a really caring spirit in the interviews that I've seen of him. But here he is, and he's kind of talking about, he was being interviewed, I think, about 9/11, but he brings up this random story when he was friends with the Rockefellers, okay? And they tried to bring him in, to some of their groups, and he rejected it. And one of the things they said to him one time random, he's like, "Hey, do you know what the women's lib movement was about?" And he was like, "Well, yeah, I know what it's about." And he's like, "No, you don't." He said, "We started that. We funded that. That was our idea." So go ahead and listen to this interview real quick. It's pretty short. So
That's one night, and we were talking, and he started laughing. He said, "Aaron, what do you think these liberation is about?" And I said, I was pretty conventional thinking about it at that point. I said, I think that women have the right to work, get equal pay with men, just like they won the right to vote. And he starts to laugh. He said, "You're an idiot." And I said, "Why am I an idiot?" He said, "Let me tell you what that was about. We, the Rockefellers, funded that. We funded women's lib, and we're the ones who got all over the newspapers and television, the Rockefeller Foundation." He says, "And you want to know why?" He said, "There were two primary reasons. And one reason was we couldn't tax half the population before women's lib. And the second reason was now we get the kids in school at an early age. We can indoctrinate the kids how to think, which breaks up their family. The kids start looking at the state as the family, as the school, as the officials, as their family, not as the parents teaching them." And so those are the two primary reasons for women's lib, which I thought up to that point was a noble thing. When I saw their intentions behind it, where they were coming from when they created it, the thought of it, I saw the evil behind what I thought was a noble invention.
So, okay, guys, and for anybody, we're having problems with our audio. I'm not sure what's going on. We're trying to figure it out. A lot of the audio on these YouTube videos is not good enough coming through. So we're trying to figure out how we can fix this. So there is one more video that I want to play here in a minute. And I had not seen this video till tonight. So guys, you might have to crank the audio up when we play the video on your computer or on your phone so you can hear it. But if you missed what he said, one of the Rockefellers told him it was our idea, we funded it, and the reason that we wanted to do it was to break up the family, okay, and to tax the other half of the population. When only men were working, we could only tax the people that were working, the men. So when we put the women to work, they had a long-term plan. They could now get more tax money. Kind of crazy. So this was a plan from the elites. Of course, they presented it in a way and they tricked them into thinking, hey, this was our idea, and the first wave of feminism was about the right for women to vote. Okay. And then it went downhill from there. Okay. It was, different things. Okay. Vic, one of the things that we forgot to talk about in the abuse of women, and I want to mention this before we jump into this video, was there is a history of men having their wives committed to mental institutions just because they were tired of them, because they wanted to have an affair for whatever reason. Okay. So there's a lot of motivation to become liberated as a woman. Okay. Obviously in homes where Christianity is lived out, where God's word is obeyed, there's there's not abuse. There is the complement of a man and a woman together the way that it's supposed to be. So anyway, I'm trying to feel. So anyway, yeah, we're gonna try this video. We may not be able to hear it. It's a really old video, but I had not heard of this. This is Gloria Steinem admitting that she worked for the CIA. Okay, so let's go ahead and try to check this out, guys. Turn this up, and we'll see if this works or not. Okay, so.
Told me that they thought we were too liberal and too controversial, and that we would endanger their cultural programs in Austria. And the first festival was being held in Vienna. It was not encouraging at all. And the private individuals I went had particular points of view to put forward, which would have been much, much more restricting than the CIA funds were, which were free. I mean, no one was told what to say.
What do you mean they were free? You mean to say it was easier for you to work for the CIA than a private organization?
That's right. And the reason I think that comes as a surprise, as it did to me at the time. I mean, I had the conventional liberals' view of the CIA as a right-wing incendiary group, and I was amazed to discover that this was far from the case, that they were enlightened, liberal, nonpartisan activists of the sort who characterized the Kennedy administration, for instance.
You have not been working now for the CIA since 1962. You still criticize. You were down recently in Washington?
Yes, when the story broke that I had for 4 years been a Central Intelligence agent, I was demonstrating outside the Pentagon underneath Mr. McNamara's office against bombing in Vietnam. And this didn't precisely fit with the image of a CIA agent, but then neither does the CIA.
What does former...
Okay, and you can stop it there. We don't need to hear that guy. That's Anton Wilson. He's actually a Satanist or an occultist. I don't know what he's doing in the video, but so Vic, I had heard about that, but did you know that? And hold on, I got you muted.
I didn't really hear much of that at all. Can you give a summary of what she
just
said?
Basically Gloria Steinem admitting that she worked for the CIA, and she had a view of the CIA that was a right-wing group. But when she got to know them and got to working for them, she found out, oh, these guys are liberal. So these guys are good guys. And anyway, here is, a leader of the feminist movement, still active today. Okay, involved in all kinds of court cases and things like this. So, and it's come out that she worked for the CIA, kind of like a lot of people, have worked for the CIA, like Anderson Cooper. He was going to work for the CIA, but he changed his mind, decided to become a news reporter, right? And yeah, anyway, I just thought that was interesting, and I wanted to show all of these connections. Okay, there is there's been a great, very sophisticated plan to get us where we're at today. We're not even really scratching the surface of all the things that went into it, but we can see that for a couple hundred years, that there has been a plan, to bring down this country, to break up the family, to destroy men. Okay. We see, just in our generations where people after 9/11, people were signing up, to go to join the military because they were patriotic and they were, just ready to fight. But we don't see that today. It's a different story. It's kind of funny, Vic, that these people, like, I don't want to say the name of the main group out there, but these street level activists, okay, that dress all in black. yeah, they're not so tough. You know what I'm saying? When you take a look at them, and they're really picking a fight with the real tough guys, right? The men's men. The country boy can't survive. So anyway, these are the feminist type of men, the very just kind of what's the word I'm looking for here? The feminine, type of men, and the guys that carry a purse. And I'm not even talking about, you know what I'm saying? They call it a European handbag, but so I don't. I don't really have a lot of good news tonight. This show was just kind of designed to talk about these things. This country was founded by Satanists who slaughtered Native Americans. I can't really disagree with that. I believe that there was some good. There were people that came over here for a good reason, but obviously, yes, the man bun. I've already said my piece about the man bun. If no one knows that, but anyway. I lost track. I'm going to take a drink of this water and let Vic say something.
All right. Well, so Tom, something I want to say is because we obviously talk about spiritual warfare and stuff here, it's kind of the focus of our ministry and the grid by which we kind of view and talk about everything. Obviously when we talk about these topics in the church, it immediately goes to whether or not women should be pastors or not. But through the grid of spiritual warfare, in a perfect world, like God always sets up rules for a reason. And a lot of times it's not to ruin our fun or to be a curmudgeon. It's because he understands the spirit realm. He understands what the open doors are. And he's usually, when he told Adam and Eve not to eat of the fruit, it wasn't like, hey, I'm withholding something that tastes delicious. It's like, you get that knowledge, everything's going to pot. Like it was a protective measure. So with this argument, of headship, whether it's a pastor or it's a husband or it's a father, I think let's put the little pastor issue aside for a second and just through the lenses of spiritual warfare, women and children are more vulnerable on this planet. And we see all over in the New Testament, Jesus is constantly worried about the widow, the orphan, and the disabled. He's concerned that these vulnerable people are not going to be taken care of. And so God is constantly putting layers of protection between women and children and the spirit realm. And so what I like to look at with this whole controversial topic of headship, whether it's my father, it's a husband, or it's a pastor, is I know we live in a fallen world, and a husband and a pastor and a father can hurt me, wittingly or unwittingly. There can be abuse. There can be trauma. I know that all that stuff exists in a fallen planet, but the way God originally intended it was to put several layers of protection between me and the spirit realm. And when those layers of protection are removed, the spirit realm has better access to us. So it makes sense to me that they have a narrative out there that where they're doing everything in their power to get women to get out from underneath all of those layers of protection so that they're out over here and vulnerable. And so I think that, when we just focus on answering the question whether or not a woman can be a pastor or not, we miss out on the fact that headship, biblically speaking, has a lot more to do with who gets to tell you what to do, or who's got the pants, or who's smarter, or who's more intelligent. To me, it's a matter of protection. My dad has been put on this earth to intercede for me, to pray for me, to protect me. And that can be just by observing my life and giving me good counsel and stepping in and saying, Vic, what are you doing? Which he does all the time. And I'm grateful that he does. He's not doing it because he thinks I'm a fool or I'm stupid or I'm a child, but he has been ordained by God to help me out here, So I wish we could, as a church, be more mature in this discussion. And rather than it just being bickering over who can be a pastor, I wish more women would realize that the original intent of headship was to put layers and layers and layers of protection between us and the spirit realm for our safety, because he cares about us.
Right, Vic. And no, I think that's a good point. Obviously, you know, women have something to say, and women can teach, spiritual truths, and they can, women can even inspire and preach. You know what I'm saying? What I mean is, they can lead. All right. And I'm gonna leave it there, but I want to say this. Okay, take a look. Okay, and I'm gonna do some name calling or some name dropping right now. Look at the United Methodist Church. Okay, this denomination, one of the biggest denominations, okay, in the world. Here's an example of a church that has made the decision decades ago to allow women pastors. Okay, I think when we see churches do this, we can see, they're basically, when they compromise on these things, then it's like a domino. Look where they're at now. The church is about ready to split. I'm out of the loop. I don't know if they did that split yet, but I think it's real close if they haven't. And it's over, it's over issues. I know a guy. Anyway, I know a guy that's a pastor, and I'm shocked. I'm shocked at what he's become. I thought this guy was a strong brother in the Lord, but actually, yeah, he's kind of what we talked about. Okay. And it was brought up in the private chat, a soy boy. So are we allowed to say that? Anyway.
I think so.
Folks,
so can I say one more thing, Tom?
Yes.
And this is just something I want the ladies to think about. This is something for you to ponder in your own quiet time before you and God, and let the Holy Spirit speak to each of you. But one of the things that I've always wondered is, by way of the whole, like, are women given headship roles above men? And I'm not just talking about pastorate in the home. I just mean, is headship our responsibility? There are other examples in scripture where God has restricted something. He sets boundaries. So in the Garden of Eden, he said, eat of all of these trees except this one. So here's this one thing just sitting there useless, and Eve even said, oh, this is good for fruit. It was edible. She didn't get sick. She didn't die of food poisoning. So it was useful, good tasting fruit, apparently, but don't touch it. And I've often pondered in my own life, Tom, when I have my own struggles, because I've been on a long journey, because I got bullied as a kid and guys were very mean to me. And so I had to work through a painstaking, decades-long journey of getting over my bitterness towards men because they were so mean to me. And I just live in a hypersexualized culture where if you're not beautiful and sexy, you're kind of worthless. And so I had to work through all this. So don't just think, well, you were raised in a Christian home and you have a really nice dad, so of course you feel this way. I had a long journey, women. I had a long journey. But sometimes I wonder if God's saying to women, you can do anything in the world you want. There's tens of thousands of careers and life choices and paths you can take. You can do whatever one you want except this one. I wonder if that's our Garden of Eden opportunity. I wonder if he's testing every woman's heart. Like, hey, Eve blew it. And you can get to heaven and shake your fist at her and go, I can't believe you did that, Eve. You ruined it for all of us. But are we doing the same thing in our hearts when God's saying, you can do anything you want in the world. The world is your oyster. Just don't do this one thing. And then that's where the women are flocking. That's the one thing that they want. Do we have the heart of Eve when we have that in our heart? And I'm not telling you yes or no. I'm just saying this is something I've had to ponder and work through in my own life. Because if that's in my heart, that the one thing God doesn't really want me to do is the one thing I want to do, I don't want to be in that place.
Very good, Vic. Very good. And I was just bringing up here this verse. It's in Ephesians. In the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. So, folks, we want to hear what you think. What's your opinion about what we're saying tonight? Please leave a comment. Hey, we appreciate the chat and all the stuff in there. The chat doesn't necessarily get seen in the comments. So if you guys want to leave a comment as well, and obviously the people that are watching this later tomorrow, leave us a comment. Let us know that you're here. Let us know what you think. Let us know if you liked Archie Bunker, that show. And isn't it kind of crazy that the meathead turned out to be a meathead in real life? Like, that's just like poetic justice, or truth is stranger than fiction, right? So anyway, guys, yes, that's all we got for tonight. We're going to be back tomorrow night, and we're going to be, does anybody know anything about what Reiki therapy is? We're going to be talking about that tomorrow night. So we hope that that you will tune in and hang out with us. And I'm looking for my outro. It's gone. There it is. Okay. So anyway, guys, join us tomorrow night. Reiki therapy. Thanks for hanging out with it. Thanks for hanging out with us. God bless you guys. All right.